Alors bonjour à chacun et à chacune.
Good afternoon, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome. Good. I hope you're having a good Thursday. This is the 42nd meeting of our standing committee, and in accordance to Standing Order 108, Sub 2, and the motion adopted on Thursday, April 23, we are continuing the study on women's shelter and transitional housing. This meeting, as usual, will continue in a hybrid format and pursuant to standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room or remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. It's very important, please. If you wish to speak, raise your hand. For those on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I would like to remind witnesses that committee members may ask questions in either English or French. If you will need interpretation, please take a moment now to prepare your earpiece and select the listening channel you need in advance in order to take full advantage of the time allotted for questions and answers. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. However, I will not interrupt between an MP or a witness so as to keep the flow, and when the time is up, I am very strict, I'll interrupt you. Before I welcome our witnesses, I will like to provide this trigger warning. We will be discussing topics related to gender-based violence. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If any participants feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk. For all witnesses, for all MPs, it is important to recognize that these are difficult discussions, so please let's try to be compassionate in our conversations. Now I will welcome our witnesses.
Du Harmony House Shelter, ici avec nous Marilyn Matheson, Executive Director. Également du regroupement des
maisons pour femmes victimes de violences conjugales, Madame Annick Brazo.
Ms. Annick Brazo from the regroupement des maisons pour femmes victimes de violences conjugales. She is accompanied by Elise Bryan. Welcome, ma'am. YWCA Canada, Ms. Aline Nizigama, National Chief Officer.
Opening statements. Mrs. Matheson, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to appear in front of you today. Harmony House Shelter is a second-stage shelter in Ottawa that supports women and their children who are fleeing gender-based violence and abuse.
C'est bon? L'interprétation est revenue. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. In 2020, the City of Ottawa declared a housing and homelessness emergency, and the pressure continues to grow. The centralized wait list for subsidized housing has reached more than 15,000 households, and recent data shows the average wait can stretch to 7 years or more, with family-size units especially hard to find. For survivors of violence, this is not just a housing issue, it is a safety issue. When affordable housing is unavailable, women face impossible choices: remain in an abusive situation or move from place to place couch surfing without stability. If they are lucky enough to find a shelter space, they stay much longer than shelters are ever intended to support. At Harmony House, we see this every day. Survivors should be moving to permanent housing, are instead staying with us for 18 months to 2 years or longer. Families of 3 or more children stay for 2 to 4 years, and this is not unusual because there's simply no suitable, affordable housing available for larger families. If you follow the journey of a typical family, and no family is really typical, the mother flees with her children and ends up couch surfing with families and friends, moves to emergency shelter for 3 to 6 months, and then moves on to the second stage shelter for 2 to 4 years. Along the way, the children are leaving friends and moving, they're changing schools. Grades suffer, and so does their mental health. If they make new friends in their new temporary school, they can't invite their friends to their birthday parties or over to their house to play because they live in a shelter. A generation of children are growing up in shelters. At Harmony House, we have 16 transitional housing units, 11 one-bedroom, 3 two-bedroom, and 2 studio, including 1 that's accessible. Our wait list currently exceeds 130 families. Over 50 of these families have 4 or more, of which 21 have 6 or more members, 18 with children under the age of 2, and 23 with children ages between 2 and 4. Each bedroom has a bunk bed that sleeps 3. There's a double on the bottom and a single on the top. However, this configuration does not work for families with toddlers and infants. It's also difficult for families with older children and teenagers of opposite gender to share a one-bedroom unit with their mother, because our limited number of 2-bedroom units are housing families of 4 to 7 children. Our units are not designed for the families we are now serving. We are currently planning to expand. However, the experience of a shelter being built in Embrun, Ontario is concerning to us. Their original plan was for the shelter to have 24 units that incorporated several 3-bedroom units. Working with CMHC, they had to change this to 35 units, cutting down on the 3 bedrooms to 1 bedrooms and studios, which don't work for the larger families. In addition, they had to cut out the planned childcare and the communal kitchen, as well as downsizing office space and consulting rooms. Our units are rented geared to income. However, many women arrive at Harmony House with no income. They've been forced to leave jobs and their communities to survive. Their barriers, they are ready to rebuild, but face systemic barriers, lack of affordable childcare, gaps in before and after school care, immigration and work permit challenges. We've seen women with professional certifications in their country of origins who cannot afford to take equivalency tests in Canada in order to work. When women are ready to move forward, the system is not ready for them. Every day we turn away women and children who have already done the hardest thing. They have chosen to leave violence. They should not face a second barrier system that cannot meet them where they're at. Right now, too many women and children are left waiting in unsafe situations, not because we don't know what works, but because we have not funded or built it. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Matheson. Vous êtes...
Thank you, Ms. Matheson. You're very disciplined. Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Ms. Brazeau and Ms. Briand for 5 minutes, ladies. Good afternoon, Chair and distinguished committee members. Thank you very much for the invitation. The Association of Shelters for Women Victims of Domestic Violence is a large network that has been committed since 1979 to defending women's rights to physical and psychological well-being. It currently comprises 47 healing homes and shelters located across 16 administrative regions in Quebec. In the 2024-2025 fiscal year, our member shelters provided shelter to more than 2,700 women and over 2,000 children. Their average occupancy rate is 96%, and that is not counting women and children who receive nearly 30,000 non-shelter services. In total, member shelters responded to some 80,000 requests for services and information, primarily from women, also from family members, professional, and other resources. We want to address the issue of the capacity of women's shelters to support women holistically. We have identified 3 factors that have a fundamental impact on the journey of women who are victims of domestic violence before, during, and after their stay in a shelter. First, women's shelters as frontline services need the financial resources necessary to meet women's needs when they seek help. Second, a program dedicated to the construction and renovation of shelters is necessary to ensure there are sufficient shelter places and that all women, particularly those with disabilities, can have access to those resources. Finally, women must be able to leave shelters and move into affordable, healthy, and safe housing for themselves and their children. We believe that these issues are closely interrelated and that it is essential to address all 3 urgently. Women's shelters face major challenges caused by chronic underfunding of their operations and services. In Quebec, women's shelters are mission-based and funded through the Community Organizations Support Program of the Ministry of Health and Social Services. Between 2010 and 2020, no new funding was allocated to this program. With growing demand for services and rising living costs during these years, this resulted in a decline in service capacity to approximately 50% of 2009 levels. From 2020, a new investment of $57.5 million for shelters and housing phased through 2026 and 2027 allowed for some catch-up. However, needs have never been fully met. Without this increase, managers will be faced with challenges. They will fail to meet salary scales and cut back on other working conditions, thereby risking loss of staff or reduce the number of positions and thus face service disruptions in order to meet their employer obligations. For many, the latter scenario, which is the most likely, but in most cases it will be the quality and accessibility of direct services for women who are victims of domestic violence and their children who will suffer. To this end, we recommend allocating transfer to the provinces to support mission-based funding for women's shelters. In 2025-2026, SOS Violence Conjugale, the central agency that received a large portion of requests for assistance in shelter in Quebec, reported a benchmark of success rate of 45%. There is a significant need to create new shelter spaces. In the absence of programs dedicated to the construction and renovation of support and shelter homes and MH2s, at both federal and provincial levels, the creation of new spaces and units remains stuck in an administrative process between Canada Homes and the Société d'Habitation du Québec. Not to mention the need to align with the Quebec Ministry of Health and Social Services grants for service delivery, without which the shelter cannot operate. We therefore recommend that the Government of Canada establish a dedicated program for support and shelter homes, including second-stage homes within Canada Homes. This program would include grants for construction, relocation, renovation, and adaptation of shelters for women who are victims of domestic violence. Women extend their stay in support and shelter homes because they cannot find new housing. The housing crisis exacerbates the problem of a shortage of shelter spaces. The consequences of domestic violence affect women's ability to meet their basic needs and secure housing. Women supported by our services have often seen their incomes and financial security diminish due to economic violence or because their ability to work has been compromised by the violence they have experienced, sometimes for years. The women we support also very often have dependent children. To help, I will interrupt you, and I apologize, madam, but I must interrupt you. Your 5 minutes are up.
Nizi Gama from the YWCA. I said YMCA, so I apologize. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente et membres du
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members.
Gama, and I am indeed the National CEO of YWCA Canada. Across the country, YWCAs operate 34 shelters and more than 2,800 units of affordable and supportive housing, with more than 2,000 additional units planned or in construction in 18 communities throughout the country over the next 3 years. Across housing, childcare, youth, employment, and other community programs, the YWCA movement employs more than 6,500 staff and serves more than 636,000 people annually. And for more than 150 years, YWCAs have responded to gender-based violence, homelessness, poverty, and systemic inequities. Today, those pressures are converging, and survivors are facing a system that is overcapacity and increasingly difficult to navigate. The evidence is clear. A recent report from Women's Shelters Canada found that emergency shelters and transition houses have an average of 17.5 funded beds, but are operating 21 beds on average. That's about 20% overfunded capacity. And second stage shelters have an average of 8.5 funded units, but operate 10.5 units on average, which is about 24% above funded capacity. 64% of emergency shelters and transition houses operate beyond funded capacity more than once a month. And because affordable housing is out of reach for many, 80% of emergency shelters and 65% of second stage shelters are extending stays beyond their usual limits. This is not just a shelter capacity issue, it is a service coordination issue as well. When survivors cannot move quickly from emergency shelters to second stage housing or permanent affordable housing with access to income, childcare, mental health care, legal assistance, and other stabilization programs, the whole system backs up. And the result is longer stays, longer wait lists, more turnaways, and fewer stable, safe options for survivors. But we see this across the YWCA movement, and we know that the coordination work often starts before people arrive at our doors. Since 2022, our National Emergency Survivor Support Fund has supported more than 1,400 survivors and their children with things like moving costs, transportation, rent, utilities, and housing stabilization. 90% of participants in this program said that this support was the primary reason they were able to leave violent situations and start a new life. But we cannot keep up with the demand. A recent internal survey shows an average stay of 19 months in transition housing, with occupancy averaging above 95% at all times. More than 60% of YWCAs maintain a wait list for housing units, and close to 9,000 women and their families are currently waiting for housing and support services in our system. And these pressures fall the hardest on Indigenous women, Black and racialized women, newcomer women, and women with disabilities, and women in rural, northern, and remote communities. At the same time, more than half of the organizations report a chronic shortfall in core operational funding, alongside staff burnout and turnover. So the question is really about funding shelters as essential community infrastructure. Renewing the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence should include plans for sustained and flexible operational funding so that shelters and transition housing providers can maintain appropriate staffing, programming, building operations, and wraparound supports. And we need capital funding to expand and preserve safe, affordable, and supportive permanent housing so that survivors can move through a real continuum of care instead of getting stuck in emergency spaces that were never meant to function as long-term solutions. If we are serious about responding adequately to gender-based violence, then our policy and funding decisions must match the reality that survivors and frontline workers face every day. Thank you for your time. Merci.
Merci à vous, chère madame.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing. We will start with the series of discussion. We will start in the Conservative Party with Ms. Cody. You have 6 minutes.
Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for coming today. It's greatly appreciated that you can share your insight on our shelter system. I would like to start with Ms. Matheson, if I might. You mentioned about current needs is not what shelters were designed for. And so I'm wondering, for those individuals fleeing violence that are housed alongside those dealing with severe mental health needs and addictions, and how are shelters set up to take on responsibilities that go beyond what they were designed for, particularly when it comes to protecting those in need of additional supports while respecting those fleeing an environment of violence and addiction?
We work with a lot of community partners to provide mental health support, especially for children. We have we've got a grant from the provincial government to have child therapists. So we through Crossroads, Children's Treatment Center. And so we're working with them. We work with a lot of the community health center that also have counseling. We have outreach services ourselves for people who are on our wait list. We reach out to them to see if we can provide safety plan for them, how they can move to maybe a different place, like a hotel that's hosted by the City of Ottawa. However, those places are really difficult for families because a lot of the drug dealers and human traffickers wait outside for the teenagers to come out. It's really a difficult situation for parents. I've talked to several mothers who are afraid to have their teenagers walk out after they come home from school when they're living in these hotels and motels. So it's very difficult.
That's terrible. So women are staying in unsafe relationships because they simply cannot afford rent, groceries, or childcare on their own. Are you seeing this affordability pressures directly increase demand for shelter services?
We're seeing, the affordability for our services, you mean? I'm sorry, I'm not under...
For shelters, are you seeing an increase of those in need of seeking shelters?
Yes.
Because of the affordability crisis?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And we're seeing a lot of women at our door that don't have any income. They were not allowed to work when they were married, or they weren't allowed to get a higher education than high school and don't qualify for anything. We're seeing all kinds of situations at our door.
So would you say that when a woman is in an unsafe relationship like that, you mentioned that they're not able to work, would that not affect them later on in their retirement years if they're not able to accumulate hours and work income and do support
Yes.
them? So would that also keep them in an unsafe relationship?
Yes, absolutely. That keeps them in the unsafe relationship. And the fact that several of these women have 4, 5, 6 kids. We have a family of 6 kids in 2 bedrooms, and it's very, very difficult for the family, especially trying to divide between genders who shares what bedrooms, and their bedrooms are very small, and they've been there for years.
Acknowledge that financial coercion and financial abuse is also a barrier for women.
Financial abuse, yes.
So does your facility currently have a wait list? And if so, how long is it?
Yes, it's about 130, it's over 130 families.
Wow. So what are the dangers of having a wait list of over 130 families, and does that put vulnerable families at risk of experiencing more violence?
Yes, it does. And as I said, we have our outreach people. When you apply and we don't have a space for you, our outreach program reaches out to you and advises you of a safety plan. And a lot, depending on what your circumstances are, you may end up in one of these hotels or motels that is a shelter operated by the City of Ottawa.
So with the different dynamics of all the shelter systems, especially those families fleeing domestic violence, I'm hearing that the statistics do not always show everyone that's in emergency shelter support. Have you heard of that? And could you also tell me what the stats are, the current level of women in secondary stage shelters, and has there been a rise in that in the last 5 to 10 years?
It's gone over 5 or 10 years. I don't have those exact numbers with me, but they have raised quite a bit. I mean, we started out with 16 units, and they were not full at the time, 40 years ago. Now we have 130 families on the waiting list. And a lot of these women are not being counted because they're in the city shelters, and they need the supports of violence against women counselors, but they're not being able to reach them because they're being housed in city hotels and motels.
So would you say that is an oversight not to account for everyone in the statistics?
Yes.
To reveal the lack of affordable housing for them?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I've spoken with a lot of women who feel like the shelter system can be unsafe due to the active drug abuse and violence that often occurs. Additionally, entering these spaces can be re-traumatizing for women fleeing relationships with chronic drug users or domestic violence situations. Are shelters of today truly a safe transitional housing space for women and children fleeing domestic abuse and violence?
Yes, there are other places other than VAW shelters that women who have addiction problems can go. However, we know that when they're separated from their children during addiction, when they have suffering from addiction, it's not good for the mother and it's not good for the children. I mean, we need to seriously look at.
Merci, Madame Matheson. C'est tout le temps que nous avons.
Thank you, Ms. Matheson. That's all the time we had for Ms. Cody's questions. Ms. Minard, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, experts, for enlightening us. This is an important study. Do you have data? And if you don't, please transmit those to us. We would gladly take that information. Ms. Brazeau and Ms. Briand, can you assess right now? Well, everyone from the beginning of this study has talked about wait list, and it breaks our hearts to hear that. And how many beds do you think are missing to at least be able to take in those women who come to ask for support, at least at the first stage? And can you give us a figure with respect to that? I can answer that question. Currently, in Quebec, we are working on a report in partnership. Well, the report belongs to the Ministry of Health and Social Services, but we're contributing to producing this report. We do not yet have conclusions about the lack of space or places, but we know that we lack space in 13 out of 17 regions in Quebec, and there are 6 of them that are really priority, and the rejection rates, the turn-away rates are very high. Quebec, Laval, among others. Success rates there, take-in rates are at about 20%, so it's very low. And we believe that in the short term, we will be able to create some additional spaces. But we would think that we can create about 60 places, and I'm speaking here about places that will be operated without being funded. But it would require the building of new homes, and very quickly. And the wait list right now are an average of 8 weeks. And this is figures from 2024, but we know that the wait times have increased since then. Thank you. Last Monday, I was in Montreal for the construction of a new home, which is the Gabriel home. And it's close to my heart because it's my namesake. And so we are fully aware of the fact that we need to quickly increase the number of places available. Ms. Matheson, I didn't really prepare for this question, but I was very touched when you talked about children's experiences, those children who have to grow up in this space that is not their home, in a refuge or in a shelter. Could you give us some examples? You gave some examples like you cannot invite your friends for the birthday, etc. So what's your reading of this experience of the children who are forced to live through shelters?
Who it started out in an emergency shelter, and now they've been with us for over 4 years, and they are growing up. We have seen them through our childcare system, and now they're attending the after-school program, and they can't bring their friends back because they're in a shelter. The problem with housing with them is the mother has been held back with immigration problems.
C'est éclairant. Ce qu'on tente aussi.
Okay, so what we want to highlight is those experiences that people have through the testimonies that you provide for survivors. So what, concretely speaking, can a passage through a shelter bring us an added value? And why is it that sometimes we see that some women are forced to go back to these shelters? Yes, the reality is that condition, that situation, but what should we make sure to put in our report? Ms. Brazeau, Ms. Briand. Well, what these shelters do is that they take them out of isolation. It brings these women out of isolation. They can help each other, give themselves tips and tricks. There are some women who don't speak the language, French, and they will be in contact with other people, whether it's women or children. And then the question, in answer to the question, why do they come back? It's really an issue of domestic violence, and that's why we need to be present with these women, give them tools, meet them often. It's a journey. You don't need to go fast. You need to make sure that things are set up in place, let them understand the process. For some women, it takes about 7 times before they leave the violent partner, so it's a process. You need to give them the tools and accompany them, and sometimes, because there is no low-cost housing. So we would see some women who will go quickly into another relationship or go back to the violent relationship, because even when things get hard, even when you're living with your two people, and when you're a single parent, it can become very expensive. So these are my quick explanations to your questions. Ms. Menizigama, do you want to add something with the experience of survivors? What do you hear? Well, about how to break that cycle of violence. We listen to them to be able to develop solutions for them afterwards. So we see this affordability crisis that is very recurrent. It's very expensive to go back into the community to find a job, but sometimes they are forced to go back to their violent partners. Often, sometimes, we hear that the solution would be that the women do not leave the home, but that person who is the source of the violence should be required to leave the home. So those are solutions that we can explore. Thank you. I'm sure you have another opportunity to give more information. Ms. LaRouche, 6 minutes. Thank you very much to the witnesses for being here. Ms. Nizigama, I'm sure we will have another opportunity to speak. And Ms. Matheson, your experience with children, with families, I've talked about this. I want to come back on this. I underscored last time a youth literature prize that was given, the story about an 8-year-old girl with her little brother who went with their mother to a shelter which is known as the hidden home, and they went there to escape violence. So it's from the perspective of an 8-year-old child. And there was even a story about a birthday, 2 birthdays that they tried to highlight with the staff of the shelter, and they tried to create happy moments with the family, and regardless of it all. So it's difficult for families to experience that. Ms. Brazo, Ms. Brienne, I'm turning to you now. You talked about Canada Homes, and I really want to know what you're expecting from Canada Homes. What we have heard when we worked on the committee about those, what we said is that Quebec would have the final say. That means that you will have a representation to make with SHQ. And so are you saying that that's not the case so far? Well, right now on the field, we have some ongoing projects with our sister organization, the Maison des Mises Étapes. Well, it's quite complex with Canada Homes right now. It's quite chaotic what is happening. I will not mince words. The guidelines that we receive change every week, every day. The forms, the letters of understanding, everything is quite complex, and we are not on the same page with SHQ. The thing is that these two institutions are having a hard time communicating, and this situation is persisting. Especially with SHQ, we don't have a dedicated program for the building of shelters or secondary stage shelters, and so things become even more complex. So I would say that currently the situation is very difficult. I may add to this, with the Quebec Housing Society, it's very difficult to develop a project to try to avoid huge mortgages. We know that construction costs have increased, and so we need help from elsewhere, because just with SHQ it's not possible. And so we know that there are different criteria that have to be reconciled, and it takes several years to get things into play. And we have heard, and people have told us, that this is a real need. We see that one stage is pushed the can is pushed down the road, and a woman would stay in an emergency shelter for longer, and that takes the space of a woman who needs an urgent shelter right now, and she cannot continue her empowerment process to come out of these shelters. And all of this delays the process for these women who need to get out of the situation. And so we need these shelters. This is my other question. We know that Quebec has a wide shelter network, and you said that the crisis is more glaring in 6 of the regions, including Montreal and Quebec. Well, I want to know what are the main challenges that these first stage shelters are facing. Ms. Briard, you were interrupted at some point in time. I will give you an opportunity to continue your statement. Well, in what I was saying earlier, I wanted to say that there is an Australian model whereby when women left these healing homes, there was a fund that was used to relocate these victims so that they could buy furniture, etc., for relocation. I know that some provinces provide that, but not everywhere, so we could use that to encourage women. I can't remember your first question. Yeah, you were talking about the fact that we are lacking in shelters. In some of our shelters, we can host 12 women and children. The largest have 18 women, and it's not a lot when they stay 2 to 3 months, and we know that there are many victims of domestic violence, and so we're unable to meet the demand. We know that we see one application out of 2 being accepted. So sometimes they have to go to family or to friends. And while we're accepting some women, there are others who are waiting for us, and we're lacking homes. In Montreal, we are lacking also, and the houses are small, considering the number of people. Sometimes we would buy those homes and try to adjust them, and that is why we're saying we need to have new constructions to have larger space to be able to welcome more women and children. Thank you, Ms. Brazeau. And this brings us to the end of this round of questions. Ms. Roberts, you have 5 minutes.
And thank you to all the witnesses, because what you do is not easy. And I want to thank you for doing it. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Matheson the first question. So the violence against women has increased by 76%. Is it not the responsibility to protect women by ensuring that the laws are in place to keep the perpetrators behind bars?
Yes, it is, but there's a lot of women who are afraid to report, because once they report, and if the abuser is still left in the home, they can be abused again. And it's a cultural thing as well. Certain cultures, you don't abuse. In rural areas, it's hard to, your neighbor is far away. It's hard to run to your neighbors to phone. The safety tips that we give is always find a room that you can lock yourself in, and always keep your cell phone with you so you can call for help. But sometimes the police services don't show up or don't see it as a difficult situation and leave the abuser there.
So you mentioned housing, and I think everybody on this panel did mention housing. So I guess my concern is, what percentage of women seeking transitional housing are currently unable to access your services due to the capacity constraints?
Well, as I said, we have a waiting list of 130 families, and there's a lot more out there. I don't have the exact numbers of what percentage can't access our housing, but it's stable housing that we need, not just shelters.
So here's what confuses me, and maybe you can help clarify this. And I will ask this question of all the witnesses. In July of 2024, we were called back to the House to committee because of the intimate partner violence and how much it had increased to 76%. And here we are 2 years later, and we're still hearing it from all witnesses, the lack of housing. So how is it that this current government has a housing plan, and yet every committee that we go into, every witness that comes forward has the same scenario, lack of housing? What is it that we need to do to make this government understand the importance of saving women and having the ability to provide them with the proper housing? Because it's 2 years later and we're still hearing the same thing. Anyone can answer that. We'll start with you, Mrs. Matheson.
If we don't provide the housing, if we don't get the children out of the shelters, then you're going to not end the cycle of abuse. They may continue the cycle because of it. Down the line, it's going to get worse.
So I will ask everyone the same question. Do we need to put more pressure on the government to ensure that the housings are ready for these women so that they can have a safe place to raise their families? Yes or no?
I can jump in.
Sure.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Allison, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
Yeah, so I think you asked a question about why we're not seeing any, so the stats are continuing to go up, but we also know that at a time of economic crisis or economic difficulty, that's also, those are also accompanied by more increasing violence levels. What we are not seeing in the current approaches are a dedicated carve out in the funding that we have for affordable housing, especially for shelters and transitional housing. We need to have a dedicated carve out. And you asked a question about the statistics. Currently, estimates are that 40% of all wait lists for affordable housing are usually women and children and families, and a lot of them are fleeing unsafe situations. So we need to see, equivalent levels of funding that are dedicated carve out for women and families facing violence to be able to have the
Sorry to interrupt.
tracking
So
numbers.
What would you tell this government is the most crucial thing right now to ensure that we protect these women escaping violence? What is the number
fast
one
track.
thing? Fast track.
Yeah, we need to fast track the housing. We need to work with Build Canada Homes, to work with established organizations like YWCAs or other our community partners that have shovel-ready projects that can start building right now, that we have wait lists already, people, so that we can start unclogging the system and have that flow in the system so that shelter beds are freer for whoever needs them next. And so we are not seeing that yet, and we are hopeful. We've included this in our pre-budget submission.
Merci beaucoup, chère madame, pour ces commentaires.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for these comments. Now I'll give the floor to Ms. Tessa Dexon for 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair.
Quick question to Mrs. Matheson about what my colleague Ms. Roberts was asking about pardon me, about criminal law reform legislation. And I was just up in the House delivering a speech on Bill C-16, which is the Protecting Victims Act. And I'd like to get your take, Ms. Matheson, just following up on your previous answer, about the steps that this bill is taking to make women feel that justice is more accessible to them. I worked in family law and in the violence against women sector as well, and a complaint that we often faced was that justice was just so difficult for these women to access. And even though they might be seeking emergency housing or other types of safeguards, actually navigating the justice system, whether through the family courts, which often intersected with the criminal courts, was so convoluted, expensive, time-consuming, and puzzling and confounding for these women. So when we talk about Bill C-16 and the measures we're taking to enhance victims' rights, whether through having testimonial aids or ensuring that the justice system moves faster, or making sure we allot additional time to cases of intimate partner violence so they don't get turfed out based on Jordan rules. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you and your sector are interpreting how Bill C-16 will affect or impact these women's lives and your work?
Well, one of the problems that our women are facing is that the cost of getting legal counsel to help you. All our frontline workers are tied up with helping with wraparound services to help these women know where to go and how to access, and there's no free legal help out there. It's a big barrier, and then they end up falling back. There's so many other things that they need to consider. They have to consider their jobs or looking for a job and their kids, that sometimes it falls off the table for them.
Yes, fully understand what you're talking about. So it's really those kind of on-the-ground practical supports, access to some legal advice and services that are expensive and hard to come by, for sure. At the federal level, what we can do, the tools we have are largely legislative. So when we talk about reforming criminal law, at least to make laws more, I wouldn't say friendly, but more conducive to women feeling like they can come forward and at least seek out that type of assistance, that it's going to be faster for them to navigate through the courts, for example. So as far as what we can do at the federal level with criminal law reform legislation, I understand you've got, some practical concerns about how women will actually access justice on the ground. But as far as what we can do legislatively here, do you have more suggestions for how we could
I think
flesh that
looking
out?
at the parole system as well.
Okay.
Yeah, because some of the abusers are getting out too soon, or the fear of them getting out is not helpful to these women.
Yeah, and to that end, we have Bill C-14, which is our bail and sentencing reform legislation, which is currently at the Senate, and we're hoping to get into the hands of law enforcement so they can start making those on-the-ground impacts as well. So a question for Madam Nizigama, if I could, and this is about your experience in dealing with folks around equity who might have intersectional identities. And I want to ask specifically about youth who may be from the 2S LGBTQIA community. How prevalent or how common is it to have young people seeking shelter from the YWCA?
We see young people come in with their families, with their parents, when they are in the same violent situations, but we also can catch some of the younger people who are facing difficult issues, for example, discrimination because they may be trans, because they're coming through our youth programming as well. And we have very low barrier, very expert counseling services that can catch certain issues when they present in those services. And so I can share some statistics later. I don't have them from the top of my head right now, but we see a fair number of those because we know there have been rising rhetoric around queer youth and that are making it unsafe for them to actually reveal certain situations. And so we're trying to catch them when they come with families, but also through our youth programs.
And for those queer youth specifically, really the work we would like to be able to do is just prevent all this from happening in the first place, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about the systemic issues you're seeing that are causing these youth to seek emergency, whether it's familial, cultural, linguistic, financial?
Yeah, it could be the situations at home.
Un autre tour, Madame Nizigama.
That would be for an...
Je tombe toujours sur vous. Je suis désolée. Alors, maintenant, Madame Larouche, pour 2 minutes et demie. Merci de votre compréhension.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Merci encore aux témoins d'être avec nous aujourd'hui pour cette étude si importante et pour le travail que vous faites à tous les jours. J'espère que vous prenez soin de vous pour ne pas que vous viviez de l'usure de compassion.
Je m'excuse, Madame Andréane, il n'y a pas d'interprétation.
Ah, d'accord.
On va juste...
Hello? Interpretation? Hello? Hello, can you hear me? Hello? 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 Great. Okay, so thank you very much to all the witnesses for being with us for this very important study. You're changing lives every day, and I hope that you do not become victims of being worn out with respect to compassion, because that's a threat for your mental health as well. Now I'm going to turn to Ms. Brière, and maybe Ms. Brazeau will have something to add. We're talking about space in shelters. But we also know that there are many women who are experiencing hidden homelessness when they are leaving this cycle of violence, which is already very difficult. So how is this reality reflected around you? What are you hearing about this hidden homelessness? Well, often, these are women who will move from one place to another. They will live with friends. They will go to homes where they have different types of relationships, and so they go from one place to another because there is a limited time within shelters, so they need to leave, and since they can't find affordable housing, they will go and live with someone else. Sometimes they will borrow a room or borrow a sofa, and they start experiencing violence from that person who was supposed to welcome them and take care of them. And so these women are at risk because they have no home, and they start experiencing new types of violence, whether it's official partners or not, from all kinds of relationships. I see that Ms. Brienne is nodding the head. Do we have enough data to measure the scope of this phenomenon? Well, unfortunately, because this is hidden homelessness, it is very difficult to document. But I may add to this topic that women are in a special situation, especially when they have children. They're in a peculiar situation. There is a risk that they would lose their children because of this hidden homelessness. So they have even less of a choice than to go back to that partner because they are afraid of losing their children. That's an ever-present fear for them. Yes, I have only 10 seconds left, but I really hope that beyond extra space in your shelters, I hope that your human resources will do better. Maybe we can talk about it more later. Thank you, Ms. LaRouche. Ms. Cody, 5 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to focus my questions now on, is it Ms. Nizigama? Okay, perfect.
That's
sorry,
correct.
Sorry, I didn't want to mispronounce it. Thank you for coming today. The National Shelter Study in 2024 update shows that the shelter occupancy rate is increasing due to an increase in the number of overall users, as well as the length of stay. Do you see the affordability crisis and rising cost of living as a factor resulting in this increase?
Absolutely. We always see that cross between affordability, specifically when it has to do with housing, and gender-based violence. And the cross of that is what's actually increasing the numbers that we're seeing in the shelters and the demand for affordable housing.
And have you seen this increase over the past 5 to 10 years?
We've seen that increase, but also we see that because of the lack of that continuum of care, because people are not going and moving through the system as they should when they come at the emergency point. We also see it because there's just a lack of coordination between, the provincial, federal, and territorial plans, so that we're not getting the adequate support, whether that's operational funding, to be able to support people. So the wait lists are getting longer, and people are waiting longer.
You're talking about wait lists here, and it looks like at different areas it's a significant number. And have you heard of women being turned away because the shelters are full? And what are the consequences to these women for their safety when there is nowhere else for them to go?
Well, the stats are that 1,000 women and children are being turned away every month right now because of a lack of space. And so I didn't catch the last part of your question, but we have people being turned away. Actually, the stats monthly, collectively in Canada, it's 20,000 women and children are being turned away every month.
To focus on the last part of my question, because I really want to know what the consequences are for their safety when they have nowhere else to go.
They have to either go back to unsafe situations. They are on the street. They are in, I think somebody mentioned sometimes when we were able to help them and put them in a third space, like a motel. But again, that's when we start seeing some risk for human trafficking and other challenges that can happen because of that desperation. And so, again, the risk of re-traumatizing and then intergenerational, like passing on the cycle onto the next generation, especially when there are children involved. So we're also seeing like critical, fatalities. So we've seen a rise in homicide. We know that when women are leaving unsafe situations, that then their abusers are actually looking to have the most extreme forms of violence.
So would keeping cost of living affordable and better support women so they can move away from shelters and be more self-sufficient and be able to move away from abusive relationships?
Yeah. Yeah, and we see that in our services because we are a multi-service YWCA. We have the largest network of employment programs for women, and so we are able to move people from that scarcity emergency into skilling, upskilling, reskilling, and then help them attain a job and be able to actually rebuild their lives and give them access to childcare, give their younger people in their care access to camps and other services so that they actually have that wraparound service, including counseling and other things that they may need for their mental health and other areas such as legal help as well. So that multi-service approach is an approach that we would like to see supported and funded adequately.
So we see that seniors are more likely to struggle with mobility issues. And with this affordability crisis, more seniors seem to be seeking the shelter system. Would you say that the shelter system is equipped to accommodate the unique mobility needs of seniors? And has the system kept pace with the growing number of seniors who now have nowhere else to go?
No, we have gaps in that care, and this is something that we actually are studying at YWCA, and many of our member associations are actually looking to build as part of their new plan builds facilities where they can have that accessibility and the supports that come with aging, especially for women, knowing that we don't have a lot of, there are gaps as well there for women's health that we're not going to get into here, that we also are looking to be able to support. So no, we haven't kept up with the fact that we have an aging population, but we are very aware of that.
Affordability and housing at this point then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Voilà, ça complète le tour avec Madame.
So that brings us to the end of the round with Ms. Cody.
And thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I want to start with you, Ms. Nizigami, because you were talking about the amount of violence that is happening and the danger of women returning to where they came from, and that's why our government is trying to advance the Bill C-16 so that we can get at things like coercive control and prevent the femicides that are happening. I know that the National Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence is up for renewal. How important is it to renew that?
It's critical to renew that, and we actually think that we should start some of those negotiations. We've seen the delays that happened the last time when we were having the provincial and territorial negotiations, and we are calling for an urgent beginning of that process so that when it comes, at the end of the current agreements, we are actually ready to go, and it is adequately funded. We actually also are calling for a commissioner to oversee that implementation because we think that's going to come with more accountability and reporting on the numbers and impact.
Yeah, I think it's really needed, and I think that that along with the $1 billion that's been put aside for shelters and transitional housing, obviously more is needed, but I think that this is super important. Ms. Matheson, you mentioned childcare, and I'm interested to know about childcare in the shelter situation. What's the availability like? Is there another gap there?
There is. I mean, we have a small childcare, but because of the capacity, the staffing, and the space size, we can only help women who are taking courses or are going to court or medical appointments. We can't do permanent childcare for women who are working, and so there's a big difficulty. And the childcare has to be trauma-informed childcare because the children have witnessed what their mother has gone through, and that is a specialized area.
Very good. And Ms. Nizigama, do you provide childcare services as well at the YWCAs across the country?
We are the second largest nonprofit provider of childcare across the country. So yes, we usually do the co-location of building new housing and childcare are often together. That's also something that we're proposing in the 2,000 units that we have planned over the next 3 years that we're trying to work with Build Canada Homes on.
Excellent. So we've heard a lot of witnesses talk about the lack of transitional housing, and I'm trying to get more information about what transitional housing really looks like. Is that townhouses? Is it apartments? Is it a combination of things? So I would ask each of the witnesses if they could weigh in on that, starting with Ms. Nizigami.
Yeah, in our services, it really depends on the profile of the people we're helping. Sometimes it could be co-location and multiple women living together, and then that becomes kind of like a kinship model where they also care for each other and help with each other's other needs. We also may need some individualized support. It also depends on the level of trauma, whether we also have some substance use challenges that we may need to tackle. So it really does depend, and we try to have that customized care for everybody.
Thank you. Ms. Brazeau and Ms. Briand, your comments.
Donc, oui, donc au niveau...
So, with respect to emergency healing homes and shelters, these are shared spaces because we do interventions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also know that we cannot help all women to get housing, and so we will provide for such women meetings. There are some women who can need to wait 3 to 6 months to receive some assistance. We also have secondary stage shelters where there is some level of supervision and assistance there, so our resources are there to help the victims. But I want to take a few minutes to say that we talked about hotels as alternative solutions. What we see as a problem is because sometimes we have no choice to use that, but they experience violence because spouses come there, there is no safety, it's not properly secured, and there is no psychological assistance when these women are in hotels, so we don't think this is a proper solution.
Ms. Matheson, quickly, if you could talk about the transitional housing and what that looks like.
Transitional housing, I don't feel is appropriate for children because they are pushed pillar to post already. We need third stage housing, stabilized housing, and supports for that. Supportive housing, they still need the supports, they still need the trauma-informed counseling.
Merci beaucoup à vous quatre de vous être...
Thank you to all four of you for making yourselves available today, and I wish you a safe return, ma'am. And thank you to all of you. We will suspend for a few moments to usher in the second panel. Thank you.
commencer, j'aimerais transmettre certaines consignes.
Before we begin, I want to give some instructions to the witnesses and to the MPs. Before you take the floor, please wait for me to name you. If you are participating by video conference, please click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. That's much appreciated. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For those on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. As easy as that. I want to remind witnesses that committee members may ask questions in either English or French. So if you need interpretation, please right now take a moment to identify the right channel so as not to lose precious seconds. I want to remind you that MPs need to address the chair. And as you may have noticed, I don't interfere with discussions, but I stop you when the time is up.
Ms. Mercer, Advocates Law Professional Corporation. Kristen Mercer, lawyer and gender-based violence policy expert. Welcome. Safe House and Service Hub for Survivors of Sex Trafficking in New York Region. Carole Wild-Goose, team lead. And finally, Women's Support Network of York Region. Dr. Jacqueline Ben-John, Executive Director. Welcome to all. We all begin with the opening statements. Mrs. Mercer, j'espère que je prononce bien. Mercer, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, Madame.
Thank you. Bonjour, merci, Madame Chair. And members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and thank you also for the work that you're undertaking on this important topic. My name is Kirsten Mercer, and I'm a lawyer who practices in the field of human rights and gender justice, as well as GBV policy, as we sometimes refer to it. I'm privileged to work with survivors, frontline service providers and anti-violence agencies, policymakers, and other experts in an effort to develop and advocate for systemic policy and program solutions that will bring us closer to a world without violence. I have 5 points that I'd like to share with the committee today, but I will speak to 3 of those points during my opening remarks. I would be happy to speak to any of the additional recommendations during questions, and some of them have already come up in testimony that you've heard from my colleagues in this work. First off, fix the funding structure for gender-based violence services to ensure adequacy for Canadians. In order for shelter services to be delivered effectively, these critical links in the architecture of our public and community safety systems must be adequately and sustainably funded. But in most, if not all of the country, shelter funding is allocated backwards. Typically, shelters are provided with a fixed amount of funding on a per-bed basis, and usually that figure has failed to keep up with inflation and rising costs. This funding is not based on the current reality of what it actually costs to deliver emergency shelter services, much less what's required to deliver all of the other programming that is routinely delivered by shelters across the country. As you've already heard from my colleagues who've appeared before you, most shelters in Canada consistently operate over capacity because they cannot bear to turn survivors away, but the funding does not stretch far enough. It has been many years since the allocation of funding was driven by an evidence-based, ground-up understanding of what it costs to properly deliver these services. These factors must be understood, and we must understand these services as core to public safety. They're being delivered to some of the most vulnerable members of our community, and in many places, services are being funded, at least in part, through raffles, T-shirt sales, and donations from members of the public. We can do better than that. Funding for these vital services should be based in reality and what it costs to do the job properly, and not outdated funding formulas. Our approach must start with the true cost of delivering services at a standard of adequacy that Canadians deserve, with allowances for the unique needs of rural and remote communities, the costs of delivering fully accessible services, and an ability to meet the language and cultural needs of all of the people who need to access them. My second point is to support the leadership of the anti-gender-based violence movement. Beyond providing emergency and transitional housing services, many shelters are committed to working upstream to support violence and femicide prevention. They are engaging in community coordination and high-risk case management in their communities, along with other programs that are rooted in evidence-based practices to keep survivors safer. But in many cases, this work is seen as ancillary. It's a nice to have, not a need to have, and it's funded that way. Many agencies do this work off the corner of their desks with little or no core funding support for this critical prevention work. But the organizations do it because they believe that we should be working at least as hard at preventing gender-based violence as we do trying to keep survivors safer when they flee that violence. These workers are subject matter experts in gender-based violence, and they have the knowledge and experience about what we need to do in order to prevent it. They have to be afforded the resources to lead that prevention work in their communities. My third point, gender-based violence is essential physical, human, and social infrastructure, and it's a critical part of the care economy. The gender-based violence workforce in Canada is a huge economic and wellness driver for both survivors and for the gender-based violence workforce. With over 30,000 workers, it's a critical part of the care economy in this country, and those workers exist in every riding. Real gender-based violence prevention will help to unlock vast economic capacity in Canada by freeing up literally billions of dollars that are being spent to deal with gender-based violence, both the impact on survivors and the cost of delivering services. The human and physical infrastructure of this sector is a critical part of what makes our communities safe. And although people may not see these workers as visible pillars in their community.
Je suis désolée, madame, mais je vais devoir...
I am sorry, but I'll have to interrupt you. Thank you.
Floor for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. For 6 years, I've had the privilege to work in a volunteer capacity as team lead with senior leadership of York Region Police, 360 Kids, Women's Support Network, and Victim Services York Region to have a purpose-built safe house and service hub for survivors of sex trafficking constructed in York Region. I am here to share with you a first-hand experience of trying to build housing for an extremely vulnerable population experiencing gender-based violence whose needs differ from those experiencing intimate partner violence and domestic violence. They are the literally hundreds of young girls and young women who are bought and sold every day in the conduct of sex trafficking. The reality? In York Region, in the 15-month period between January 1st, 2025 through first quarter 2026, the aforementioned agencies supported over 360 survivors. All need specialized care due to having experienced extreme trauma from physical and sexual violence, emotional manipulation causing extreme mental health issues, and substance use disorders resulting from coerced use of substances for the purposes of control. In some cases, survivors are tortured, and Stockholm Syndrome can also be involved. Some survivors have children with their trafficker, with children used as yet another form of control. Survivors will not leave a trafficker without a safe place to go with their children. They need security and trauma-informed care delivered 24/7 in a small, specialized safe house environment by experienced professionals and professionals with lived experience. Experts recommend no more than 6 survivors housed in one setting. Women's gender-based violence shelters are not equipped to care for survivors whose experiences and traumas are very different and very disturbing to their clients. In York Region, there are only 6 beds for survivors operated by 360 Kids. These are restricted to women ages 16 to 26. There are 0 crisis beds and 0 new beds for those over the age of 26. Note that Safe Hope Home moved from Durham Region to York Region this year after fire destroyed their home last summer. While they are now located in York Region, this is not new capacity. The math is very simple. There is an enormous need for specialized housing. Today, I am sharing the roadblocks we have experienced in securing funding from 2 levels of government for survivors. Despite 6 years of sustained work that resulted in all the required justified groundwork being completed and securing the support of MPs, provincial cabinet ministers, and region council, there is still no approved capital funding for the critically needed safe house and service hub that would support 15 resident survivors and many more through the service hub. One of the important messages I hope is received today regarding funding is that the unique needs of this population have not been recognized by government systems and departments, and as such, there are very few dollars allocated to housing specifically for trafficking victims. Examples of current federal and provincial housing funding application scoring questions or requirements include the cost per door, a need for funding partners, having the site already purchased and readied, etc. As discussed, survivors need to be supported in a small, home-like environments, and thus, if the cost per door is considered, it'll be high, and the Safe House will not receive approved funding. The Canada Builds Homes and former CMHC chicken and egg challenge of needing partners and or readied land before funding is approved is another roadblock. Without money, land cannot be purchased. I've secured $500,000 in private pledges, but these cannot be exercised without a government commitment. Not only are girls, young women, and children further harmed without a safe place to live, agencies providing support experience challenges in staff retention due to burnout. Social workers currently must deliver support with the most critical piece missing. That is, safe, supported housing. Human trafficking as a crime is second only to the traffic of guns and drugs. Unlike a drug or a gun, a girl or young woman can be sold many times each day, and they are. Without anywhere safe to go, a survivor is at a very high risk of returning to a trafficking situation, and in many cases, this can mean a lifetime of harm or death. If cost justification is needed, a study done at the University of Manitoba in 2007 demonstrates that by providing appropriate, timely support to survivors, there is a cost saving to society of $1.7 million per survivor. That's in 2023 dollars. This is not a partisan, nor is it solely a gender issue. This is an issue of our values as humans. Truly owning that the worst of humanity is being demonstrated here in our country every day, where one human takes control of another using extreme violence and psychological manipulation and sells that victim for their own benefit.
Merci
Thank
beaucoup.
you.
Oh, Madame, que vous êtes disciplinée. Merci beaucoup pour ce partage.
Thank you very much for sharing this information that is not always easy to hear. Dr. Ben John.
Please, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women's Study. My name is Dr. Jacqueline Ben-John, and I am the Executive Director of the Women's Support Network of York Region. WSN is established in 1992, and it's the only community-based sexual violence support center serving young York Region, providing free and confidential support to women, trans women, youth, and gender-diverse individuals impacted by sexual violence, including human trafficking. Today, I want to highlight one critical issue. Housing insecurity, poverty, and gender-based violence are deeply interconnected. A survey of 500 women and gender-diverse people experiencing homelessness across Canada, conducted by the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, found that 75% of respondents who were experiencing homelessness and/or housing need identified themselves as survivors of gender-based violence. Housing insecurity and poverty is both a driver of gender-based violence and a cause of it. Gender-based violence compels women and their children into situations where they lose access to family and personal resources, including their own employment and financial resources, pushing them deeper in poverty and housing insecurity. Further, nearly 80% report that unaffordable housing prevented them from leaving a violent situation. Many remain with or return to abusive partners, including traffickers, simply because they have nowhere else to go. We see these realities every day in York Region and across Ontario. Survivors are routinely turned away from shelters because there are no available beds. At the same time, women already in shelters cannot find affordable housing and are unable to meet the screening criteria to qualify for a lease. This creates a bottleneck that weakens the entire system intended to keep survivors safe. To compound these challenges, survivors do not experience these barriers equally. Survivors who are Indigenous, Black, racialized newcomers living with disabilities, Two-spirit LGBTQIA plus individuals and those living in poverty often face additional barriers when seeking shelter and housing. Experiences of discrimination, racism, inaccessible services, language barriers, immigration concerns, and a lack of culturally responsive supports can make it even more difficult to access safety and stable housing. As a result, those who are often at greater risk of violence are frequently those who face the greatest obstacles to finding safe places to live, safe places to flee from violence. Without safe housing options, leaving abuse becomes increasingly difficult and in some cases dangerous. Safe housing is not simply a social support, it is a life-saving intervention. According to the Ontario Association of Interval Transition Houses, most recent femicide data, 79% of victims were killed inside or directly outside their residence. The Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability notes that in Canada, a woman is killed by her partner on average once a week. At the same time, we know what works. We've been doing this work. Survivors demonstrate tremendous resilience. When they have access to stable housing and trauma-informed supports, they can heal, rebuild their lives, and achieve long-term stability. To strengthen Canada's response, we recommend 4 actions. First, increased federal investment in affordable and supportive housing dedicated to individuals and families fleeing violence. Second, expand the base funding of sexual assault centers, emergency shelters, transitional housing, and second stage housing programs to ensure survivors can access safety when they need it. Third, create dedicated housing pathways for survivors of sexual violence and human trafficking that prioritize safety, confidentiality, and trauma-informed care. York Region does not have a safe house for trafficked women, as you've heard, and VAW or homeless shelters cannot effectively address their unique needs. Finally, engage sexual assault centers, shelters, housing providers, and survivors themselves in designing and implementing housing solutions. Safe, stable, and affordable housing is not only a housing issue, it's a violence prevention issue, a health issue, and a human rights issue. No survivor should be forced to choose between homelessness and violence. Thank you for your leadership and for the opportunity to contribute to this important study.
Thank you, Madame. Et nous passons maintenant à...
Now we will move on to discussions. Ms. Roberts, you have 6 minutes.
This is because, in my eyes, you are our heroes, because the work that you do will help save a life. So I'm going to start with Ms. Wild Goose. And as you know, I recently did an undercover investigation with York Region Police. I have to admit, I learned a lot. It was very educational. Sad, but educational. And my question, and I'm going to ask you first before I move on, are the laws tough enough to ensure that we protect women, yes or no?
No.
And, sorry, Ms. Mercy, yes or no?
I'm a lawyer, so it's hard for me to answer with one word.
Okay.
I think the gap that really needs the attention of this committee is less the law and more the implementation. I think where we're falling down isn't so much the law on paper as it is the way it is being implemented, whether it's in the courts, whether it's on the ground, whether it's bringing resources to bear on these situations. So if I were to offer any words in terms of where this committee's attention is most importantly placed, it wouldn't necessarily be on reforming specific laws as it would be on ensuring that those laws are being effectively implemented and that the resources are getting to the front lines where they're needed.
Dr. Ben-John, are the laws sufficient enough to protect survivors?
Absolutely not. And laws alone cannot protect survivors. As you've just heard, it's a concern with implementation. We need to look at how laws are applied in different jurisdictions. And we have to address the root problem. And this is a systemic issue that goes beyond policies and laws. So addressing the systemic issues is addressing poverty, is addressing discrimination, it's addressing immigration.
So sorry to cut you off, but I only have limited time, but I do appreciate your response. So what really upset me during this undercover investigation was that within less than a minute of them posting onto Leo's list, I believe it's called, the police officers had 100 requests. One of the requests was for someone younger than 13. I met a mother in my office who was devastated, who doesn't believe that this government cares about women and survivors. Her daughter was groomed at the age of 15, and by the time she found her 5 years later, they had to operate on her anal, and she's now on suicide watch. And you know what the worst thing about it is? She was so afraid to go to court that the perpetrator got off. So when I asked the question about the law, how can we continue to protect women? Violence against women has increased 76%. We hear it time and time and time again. They go to jail, they get out, and they do the same thing. We have a housing issue. We have a safety issue. And I know that Ms. Wildhouse, you have been an advocate in York Region to ensure that we provide shelters. But again, there's a housing issue. How is it, and what can we do here on Parliament Hill to make sure that the government knows and understands we need a few things? We need more shelters, we need more housing, and we need to educate these perpetrators to make sure that they don't become repeat offenders.
So I'm sorry, what is your question?
What do we need to do as parliamentarians to ensure that we provide sufficient funds for housing and sufficient educational funds to ensure that these perpetrators don't continue to violate?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned when I was speaking, I've just had conversations with Canada Builds Homes. I, several years ago, had a conversation with CMHC. And, of course, there's always these you have to have in addition to. So, first of all, we need to take, when it comes to some of these things, we need to take those caveats away. If we're really serious about doing this work, we need to make sure that it isn't that difficult to do it. I've been doing this actually for more than 6 years, but 6 years with the group of people I just spoke to you about. Secondly, we need to educate, and we need to do a really good job of educating. And one of the groups of people that need to be educated, if you're worried about the law and how it's applied, is to educate our judges. Because you can be sure, you can be imagine being raped as any woman or man being raped, and you go they find who raped you, they go into court, and you have to testify as the victim. Well, you can imagine you are a clear victim in that setting, usually when they finally press charges. But in the instance of a sex trafficking survivor or a wife or an intimate partner, Jacqueline would be better to speak to this, is that they use language in front of the judge like daddy or boyfriend or whatever. And that, to the judge, sounds like, well, hey, you actually wanted to have that relationship. When in fact, no, that's been a coercion. There's different things going on there. So and children, when someone first came to me with this issue and they said, victim services said we need to build safe houses, I said, well, we can build safe houses till the cows come home if we are not, educating our children, because they need to know, just like I'm really old. When I went to school, Elmer the safety elephant, you knew you never got in a car with anybody. We didn't couch that in, the proper way to speak to, somebody in intimate,
vous êtes dans une envolée absolument extraordinaire.
I'm sorry, but you're giving us so much information, but I must interrupt you. Maybe you'll have an opportunity. I'm sad, but I must do it. Ms. Winnan, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Here for this very, very important study. Ms. Mercer, I know you didn't get to finish your last 2 points. I'm wondering if you want to take a minute or two to add the fourth and fifth points that you were speaking to.
Sure, I'll be brief because they've been mentioned already, but I wanted to add my voice to the call for full funding and renewal of the National Action Plan. We know that the Liberal Party during the last election made a commitment to continue to support that plan, and I cannot state strongly enough how important that generational investment and the plan that goes behind it is to tackling the issue of gender-based violence. So that's been spoken to already. It's a huge investment, and I just wanted to add my voice to that. The second is to again add my voice to the call, and I believe my colleague earlier spoke about this, to the call for a gender-based violence commissioner at the federal level to help oversee the implementation of the National Action Plan, the coordination of plans and work that's happening across various ministries, and to work to counteract the siloing effect that we often see in the way that governments flow resources. And so I wanted to add my call for that gender-based violence commissioner, which I believe is a critical piece of the infrastructure. So those were my 5. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Mercer. Ms. Benjon, you spoke a little bit about the role of affordable housing, and this is a theme that we have heard a number of times from other witnesses as well. Given that in Ontario we have fewer rental protections, challenges around affordable housing, can you talk a little bit about what that might mean if our systems actually made sure that we had protections in place for renters and tenants who are seeking supports and the ability to stay in their homes?
Absolutely. It's so important to ensure that the women that we're talking about, individuals that have experienced gender violence, can stay in their home. But the reality is sometimes they are in a multi-generational home. Sometimes they are not in their own home. They have been couch surfing. They've left an abusive situation and they're staying elsewhere where they are exploited again. So not everyone that experiences violence is a homeowner. And that's important to recognize it. I spoke to the intersection of poverty, for example. So many are not starting out from a place of middle class or necessarily employed. So any response has to factor in that some individuals face the additional barriers that I spoke about. Some are in a situation where they're caregiving for children. They may also be caregiving for an elder at home. So a response that recognizes they may need affordable housing outside and away from their original home because it really wasn't theirs to begin with. And that's really important to acknowledge. We're not all starting at the same place. And with that awareness, we will ensure that we have safe and affordable housing. I emphasize affordable because now this individual may become a sole support parent. They may be an individual. They're on their own. They're not caregiving for anyone else but themselves, but they may be struggling with the mental health impact, the trauma associated with the violence they endured. And some of our clients are not able to maintain housing on their own at the moment. They could not manage caregiving for themselves and may need some support. So recognizing again, survivors are not all at the same place. The solution isn't here you go, here's a housing. Unfortunately, some have been asked to leave shelters because they're struggling to follow the communal living rules. They're dealing with addictions and mental health concerns, and that unfortunately will result in them needing to seek other types of wraparound supports that have long waiting lists as well.
Thank you, Dr. Benjon. I would like to ask Ms. Mercer a little bit about, you started to describe the kind of need for understanding this as core infrastructure, that it's social infrastructure, physical infrastructure. And you also talked a little bit about the care economy, the systems lens here that you're starting to describe. Can you talk about what it would take for us to take the next generational investments to actually address these challenges that we have, how we actually build out the systems that we need here?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It can be really easy to think about infrastructure investments in terms of the extractive economy, bringing things out of the ground, building things that fly in the air, building shiny rail links that connect one part of the country to the other, or ships. Those things are easy for us to imagine, but we know that there is also sometimes a gendered economy, the caring economy, which is additive, where the resources that...
Excusez-moi, Vraiment désolée, mais c'est irrespectueux. Les collègues, Madame Connie et autres, Anna, il y a beaucoup de bruit. Sorry, there is a lot of noise. Sorry, merci.
Non, ça va? Thank you. So I was just talking about how, in contrast to the extractive type of infrastructure that we sometimes imagine, obviously pipelines are top of mind. We have this additive infrastructure that is about providing care, providing support. And it's a very gendered kind of infrastructure. I think it's really helpful for us to think about the kinds of resources that we need to have in place in the caring economy. And we know that that economy is overwhelmingly female. In this area of work, it's work often done by women, for women, on issues that overwhelmingly impact women and other folks who are survivors. And so I think that we need to see that as part of our infrastructure plan. And, it's been a long time since we had really good numbers at the national level about the cost of gender-based violence, but we know that in 2009, the cost of intimate partner violence only was $7.4 billion.
Merci
so that's
beaucoup. Merci.
The justice system and health.
Je vous ai donné quelques secondes de plus pour...
I am sorry to interrupt you. I give you a few seconds more to ensure equity. Ms. LaRouche, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. We're taking a lot of notes, and we have noticed that the issue of shelters is at the heart of the cycle of the healing of violence. But it's not enough. That's why we talk about giving victims the means to take care of themselves. So I'll turn to you first, Ms. Mercer. Many witnesses highlighted and mentioned in the study that many people the importance of the need for a leave related to family violence. So what would be the efficient methodologies? And I'm sure, we are trying to fight for employment insurance as well to take into account this reality. So what do you think would be the most efficient way?
Femmes qui sont en train de quitter, c'est ça, oui?
Pour les congés.
What? So, je vais parler en anglais si ça va, mais so intimate partner violence leave or leave for people who are survivors of violence is something that we have seen have some effectiveness. It is job protected leave particularly is important for people who are working. But leaves are less helpful for many survivors who aren't in the workforce, who perhaps didn't have access. So some of the most profoundly impacted instances of intimate partner violence are for folks who perhaps were prevented from being engaged in the active workforce. So that may not be the best solution for folks in that situation. As I said during my remarks, my view is that we have to shift our focus to what happens after the violence has reached a point that either results in someone leaving or the need for leave or worse, in the worst of cases. We have got to switch our focus upstream. I would rather see leaves and resources being invested in prevention, in helping people get out of the situation that they're in. And, when you think about, I think one of my colleagues talked about the YWCA program. I think it's called the NESS program, the National Emergency Survivor Support Fund, which is a really small amount of money. And we're hearing from survivors who say those couple of $1,000s made the difference. That was first and last month's rent. That was money that allowed me to fix my car so that I could leave. That small bit of help was what I needed to be able to get out the door that last time and really leave the situation behind me. And that echoes the recommendation that came out of the inquest in Renfrew County that took place a number of years ago. Recommendation 19 was for a similar fund, a low barrier, easy access fund referred through service providers in the community, not necessarily the justice system, because we know that many survivors don't go to the justice system looking for help. They go to other places in their community and to whether it's shelter services or other services for survivors. These are small grants, and to be honest with you, that is hugely impactful for many people. The difference between staying and going can be really as simple as a few $1,000s, and I don't mean simple, but from a cost perspective, that's the best $2,000 a government could ever spend if that's the difference, if that's what is holding someone back.
La question financière joue.
Clearly, finance is key when we're trying to leave a violent situation. You also mentioned in your introductory statement that I want to talk about ethics in gender-based violence. We talked about money, but what do you think could be other obstacles, legal obstacles, that prevent women from leaving violent situations? You quickly glossed over that during your introduction, but I would love to hear more from you about that. And we have Bill C-16 that is coming. Legally speaking, do you think we need to recognize coercive control under this bill? Do you think that would be an added mechanism for a protection of these victims? Would that be an important component?
To be able to speak to this. I think that the concept of coercive control is a really important one, and I know we've been talking today about Bill C-16 and the criminalization of coercive control, and I think that's one set of tools. We saw a couple of weeks ago in the civil context the Supreme Court of Canada ruling in the Ahluwalia and Ahluwalia case, where the court has created a new tort, which is a claim, a kind of claim for suing, and one of the main factors there is around coercive control. I think that that's a really important concept, but I want to be clear that I don't think the solution to this problem lies in the criminal law. I think we need criminal law tools in order to tackle this, but I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that addressing ourselves to the harm after it's happened is the way to get where we need to go.
Entre autres, parce qu'on sait que le code criminel.
We know that the criminal code has given us additional tools, but the administration of justice is the responsibility of provinces. So I have 30 seconds. I think some monies need to be transferred so that the provinces, including Quebec, would have the right tools to implement the laws, because we already have the laws, but the implementation is difficult for lack of resources.
The best money that could be spent in the justice system right now, in addition to educating the judiciary, which I think is important.
Merci. Merci, Madame. Merci beaucoup. Ça complète.
Thank you. This brings us to the end of our discussion. I'll give the floor now to Ms. Cody. 5 minutes.
And thank you for the witnesses. I've got a pile of information I'm collecting here. I'm going to address my question to Carol Wildgoose. Victims of human trafficking require unique supports to help them recover from the deep trauma and extreme abuse they experienced, and requires safe spaces to heal and recover. Do you think the current shelter system provides this support?
It's not able to. Because of the unique traumas that survivors experience, they can't be cared for in the same shelters as other domestic and intimate partner violence shelters. They also often leave with their children as well. I think if I remember correctly, Dr. Ben John has said that it's 50% is what they're seeing of survivors have children with their traffickers. So it's really important that we have shelters that are geared towards trafficking victims.
So recently I received a message from someone in my riding telling me of her horrific experience as to how she was trafficked out of a women's shelter. What can we do to ensure women are not being trafficked and get recruited into a life of exploitation?
Well, I guess we need to do a better job of policing what's happening outside of our shelters, but that's hard to do too. It's very hard to keep shelters secret, because when you take someone in, you do your best that everybody will treat it as a confidential place, but you can't control what people say and do. You do your best. You make it secure as possible. And shelters are places, if downtown Toronto, we've heard that, it's Covenant House, that happens. It happens in lots of shelters where people are going for immediate care. And I guess it's the eyes and ears. And I guess it's probably a staffing issue, too. If you haven't got enough staff to keep an eye on what's going on, you're going to have these kinds of things happening.
So when shelter space is actually found out by an abuser, does that put that woman, and not only that woman, but other women in the shelter, at high risk?
It does. If the person is violent and has violent intentions, yes.
And are women losing confidence in the system?
I can't speak to that.
Okay. So survivors not only carry trauma from intense physical and sexual abuse, but also from financial exploitation. Many were forced to use their personal information tied to their credit score, which may be a barrier to accessing housing in the future. What can we do to help survivors repair their damaged credit scores so they can move forward to being self-sufficient and get into housing without their past traumas following them?
Well, I can't speak exactly to this. However, there is legislation in Ontario where the debts are cleared in terms of people who've been trafficked. So that helps with credit scores, absolutely.
I recently watched a documentary about the prevalence of human trafficking along the 401 corridor. And you were saying, I was reading here, that you supported 360 survivors. Without supportive shelters specific to survivors of human trafficking, where are they being housed?
That's a really good question, and I ask that one myself all the time. You have to understand that I do not work. I'm not one of the employees that work in any of these wonderful places where people are being helped. So I always ask that question. Initially, VQRP, the Victim Quick Response Program, covers costs for going to hotels, but of course, just as we've heard earlier, that's not a safe place to go because there's, they can be trafficked from there. They go to shelters. The workers in these agencies that are supporting survivors look for shelters in places far afield from where someone may have come out of the trafficking situation, and they find spaces for them. Or they end up not, going to a family or friend, but oftentimes they end up back into a trafficking situation because they're vulnerable.
So in Quebec, ankle monitoring bracelets have been used as a method to protect women from abusive partners. Would you agree that provision of ankle monitoring bracelets nationwide when violent offenders are released on bail would also improve the safety of all women and perhaps encourage more women to leave an abusive relationship to seek safety?
I haven't done a lot of research on that, but I suppose it could be helpful.
Is there anything else that I'm missing here that you might like to add that to have on record while you're here?
I just think it's very important that we look at this group of people who have been victimized so severely and understand how unique their traumas are. I spoke with someone at Canada Bill's Homes, and they had, I want to use a gender, they had worked in the field for 18 years and had never had anybody ask them about housing for trafficking survivors. And so that is really important that we understand how much this has not been seen. It is, everybody hears, we understand when you talk to somebody about how awful the situation is, but then when it actually comes to doing something, we run into roadblocks, and we have to take away the roadblocks.
Ce sera votre mot de la fin dans cet échange, Madame. Alors, je passe la parole à Madame Nathan.
This brings us to the end of a discussion, and Ms. Nathan, you have 5 minutes, please.
5 minutes. Est-ce que ça va?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I wanted to thank the witnesses for being here. And I understand York Region has a huge issue with trafficking, and the police work very closely with the school systems and other agencies and have developed some programs for that as well. My first question would be for Ms. Wildgoose. I know York Region is a tiered government, and the region is responsible for housing there. And they do own some lands in the areas, in different cities in the York Region. I was wondering if you had tried to partner with them to access some of the housing fundings.
Very closely with York Region, with the chair, with staff, and they have actually put housing for sex trafficking survivors on their list of housing that needs to be developed. And yes, I've looked at surplus land with them. At the moment, there isn't any that we could use for this particular project because, of course, where you select to have a safe house is a very specific place. Mm-hmm. I did actually have land, 2 acres, that we could have hopefully purchased if we had the money to do so, out of an 11-acre parcel that was almost perfect, and we lost it because that land got sold before I could come up with the dollars.
Understood. Thank you for that. Sandgate and some of the other Yellow Brick House, some of the shelters that are in York Region, do they have any beds for trafficking survivors at all?
They are not appropriate places for trafficking survivors to go.
And they don't allocate any beds?
People can't, I mean, Jacqueline is better to answer that question, but okay. Yes, Sandgate has had survivors at Sandgate.
Mm-hmm. And do you have to turn away people if they ever came to you, or they won't probably come to you directly because they may not have known where the safe houses are?
There is no safe house. I'm a volunteer. I don't have I have a house, but it's not a safe house for survivors. I'm not being facetious. I'm just saying we don't have it. That's the problem.
Got it. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
For Ms. Ben John, so maybe if I could ask you that question. I know that you're a counseling service agency. You would probably do a lot of safety planning with women that come to your center. Can you talk a little bit about, the reason I'm asking this question is prior to COVID-19, the amount of cases that are coming up, and post-COVID-19 or during COVID-19, we saw a lot, the numbers jumped. So can you talk a little bit about that and some of the reasons for these huge numbers right now that we are seeing?
Thank you so much for your question. I think absolutely, as an organization, Women's Support Network of York Region has seen the numbers jump. We have more women and youth looking for support, those specifically that have experienced sexual violence, but also human trafficking. We must recognize that there's greater public attention. There's more awareness. We've had the hashtag #MeToo movement. We've had recent cases that we know about, for example, the Hockey Canada. We know there are more cases coming forward. Doesn't necessarily mean they will have a successful outcome, but there's greater awareness. So there's more people seeking support. We see an increased number of referrals from local schools in York Region, the school boards, an increased number of referrals. We have more self-referrals. We were receiving referrals from other organizations. As there's greater awareness regarding mental health, the connection to trauma, we see more individuals seeking practical assistance. There's been an increase in the number of clients that need assistance with transportation in order to prioritize counseling and care for themselves. So that combination of, the economic, the poor economy that we are experiencing at this time has also driven up increased cases of trafficking where more individuals are being exploited. There's more sextortion taking place, different ways that individuals are being coerced, unfortunately. So we have seen an increase in our service data and people in need of various forms of support.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Benjohn. Ça fait le tour de cet entretien.
Thank you, Madam Nathan. That brings us to the end of this discussion now. I'll give the floor to Ms. LaRouche for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will turn to Ms. Benjohn first. We know that, and thank you, Ms. Mercer. Thank you, Ms. Wildgoose, for your testimonies. As I said before, you're helping women come out of this cycle of violence. So, Ms. Benjohn, I know that many organizations say that these areas are not only for shelter, but they are really for rebuilding these women. So what are the essential services that we need to keep in mind to help women empower themselves and get independent?
Are services that could definitely work from a trauma-informed place. Services that have flexibility on how to access, services that understand why a client may miss an appointment, services that are not punitive, services that meet clients where they're at, services that could offer wraparound supports or make referrals to agencies that could address the other presenting needs. It's very rare that a client is seeking support for one issue. After an intake, you realize there are multiple complex issues at play in a case. Could include immigration issues, precarious status. It can include issues with mental health, can include unemployment or underemployment. So there are multiple issues. And how do we support someone seeking assistance for dealing with trauma when they have all of these other presenting issues? We must work together as a community. Community agencies collaborate. The model of a safe house and service hub that includes the service hub is important. We can't only address one need, which is the immediate safe housing, and not ensure the same client has access to the additional supports that they need to recover from trauma, but also to be on that healing journey and to access other supports needed.
Et lesquels parmi...
Oh, I have less than 30 seconds, but what would be the most difficult services to fund right now?
Service to fund. I don't understand the difficulty. I think we've established it is so important. We know the numbers are there. We know women are dying. We know women are not leaving abusive situations. We know they're being trafficked and exploited.
I'm sorry, Ms. Benjon, I must interrupt you. And if you have additional information to share with us, please don't hesitate to send it by email. We would be happy to receive it. Ms. Roberts.
Chair, I think one of the things I'm very disturbed about is the comment you made, Dr. Benjon, about one woman is killed every single week. And I know that those stats are correct. I've heard it from my undercover investigation. And so everyone here has said that we are lacking housing. And this is really troubling me. So $8.35 billion in 2015-2016 was spent in professional services and consultants. In 24 to 25, $19.6 billion of public money was spent on consultants. That's an increase of 135%. Do you feel that that money could have been better used instead of, we know we need housing, we know we need to help the shelters, we know we need to provide housing for these children and these families. Would you not agree? We've got enough evidence. We've had this meeting many, many times. Let's forget about the consultants. You guys are the experts. Let's give you the money so we can build the houses. Do you agree, Dr. Benjon?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for acknowledging the work has been done. It's the same message. I'm sure there's been themes across all of these testimonies that you've been hearing. We know the work is done. If you look back to previous inquiries, it has been very similar. At a community-based level, academically, we've researched, we've addressed these issues, we've made recommendations. We need action. That's what we need, action. We do not need another woman dying. We do not need children dying.
And I appreciate that because in July 31st, 2024, Kate Alexander, who runs an organization called EVE, End Violence Everywhere, had to leave this country because she feared for her life. Her perpetrator got off because of the Jordan Rule. I'm sick and tired of listening to these survivors because of their stories, because they don't feel safe in this country. And the sad thing about it is 76% of intimate partner violence against women, and we keep hearing the same story over and over again. Ms. Carol Wildgoose, I know that you and I have chatted about this, and I've also spoken to Jacqueline Defina, who was our witness here previously. The housing is crucial for the betterment of the family and the children. There is the only thing that we can do is ensure that we provide them with that opportunity for some kind of normal life. Would you agree to that?
Yes, housing is absolutely the issue, as we've heard from many people today. And a carve-out, I think an understanding that we do, it was mentioned by the previous witnesses, a carve-out for some of these specific things that we need so it make it less difficult to get access to the dollars when the projects are ready to go. It's pretty simple, actually. I know it doesn't feel simple when you're sitting in government, but from the perspective of us who are doing the work, it's pretty simple. It can be done. It's not hard.
So I know that you mentioned earlier that there is no safe homes in York Region for human trafficking.
360 kids, yes, there's one safe house.
Right. And I know after speaking to Cassandra Diamond, she provides a transition home for individuals coming out of human trafficking. And I think you've met Cassandra Diamond.
Yes.
And one of the issues that she says is, even though they provide the counseling and the tools to help these young women and children get through this traumatic situation, she has nowhere to place them because of what you said earlier. There's no housing. I think as parliamentarians, what we need to do is put the recommendation forward that housing is crucial in order for us to stop this intimate partner violence. And I think the women that we've spoken to have educated us that if we don't create these homes where the families are safe, we're never going to get rid of intimate partner violence. Would you also agree to the fact that if we can combine the education with the housing, we could put a stop to this intimate partner violence?
I'm not sure. I would love to say we could stop it. It's pretty entrenched, sadly. We've got 14 and 15-year-olds trafficking 11 and 12-year-olds now, and that's a fact. We need to work really hard to do it. We can do a lot better. Let's put it that way. We can do a lot better.
Thank you.
Merci infiniment, chère madame.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And we will close this round of discussions with Ms. Minal. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I will share my time with my colleagues, Ms. Nathan. When the Prime Minister took up office after the election, he mandated the Minister of Housing to develop a housing strategy, whereby on day one, the Minister of Women's and Gender Equality was supposed to contribute. So from day one, it's imperative and agreed upon that shelters and secondary level shelters should be included in the housing strategy. Last Monday, I was present when they announced the construction of a new shelter that would be able to house survivors within 12 months. And so that is really quick, considering that there is nothing existing. In Quebec, there are tens of projects that are being developed right now. It is the speed with which the Prime Minister asked us to act, taking into account the gravity of the crisis. What is encouraging to me right now is that what I'm hearing is that there are many developers who are very sensitive and interested in helping this sector. And now, what I think, and we will take the light where it comes, what can be encouraging is that sometimes the Department of Finance, the Department of Housing, the Department of Women's Affairs and Gender Equality, and the Department of Justice are working to make sure that we multiply opportunities for housing. So, Ms. Wildgoose, you talked about the size of the scope of the housing where you're involved. What the sector is telling us from the beginning is that they don't need to harmonize things because each territory has specific needs. A house that can welcome 6 women is just as valuable as one that can welcome 48. So what do you think? Do we need to be careful with what we are developing, and we should not think about having a magic wand and create a single response for all of Canada? Ms. Mercer?
I think you've touched on something important, which is the need for local priorities to dictate what this looks like at the local level. And obviously from the federal government, you have a tremendous capacity to flow resources, but you have to work in partnership. And I think the example that you described earlier that you visited is a good example of that. And what works in one community, in a rural community, for example, in Renfrew, might be very different than what's needed in Laval or in Vancouver or in Halifax or wherever else in the country. So those local priorities absolutely have to govern, and the engagement of local communities. And as I mentioned in my testimony, the expertise of the people who do the work in those buildings has got to be present from the very beginning of the process. So this can't just be housing that's developed by housing developers. It has to be purpose-built, purpose-driven housing that's going to be specifically tailored to the needs of shelters or transitional housing. And I think it's also important to say you can't uncouple the emergency housing crisis that we're talking about from the broader housing crisis, because, of course, eventually we want people to leave these systems and go into the sort of regular, if I can put it that way, housing market. And so if they can't get out into that housing system because they can't access housing, either it doesn't exist or it's not affordable, then that's where we have the backlogs that I know you've heard so much about already.
Merci infiniment. En effet, vous êtes...
Thank you very much. I'll give the floor now to Ms. Nathan.
Madam Chair. So I'll ask the question. If you don't have enough time to answer, maybe you could write your answers and send them in. I'll start with Ms. Mercer. So we've established that this is currently an epidemic, or a crisis that we are dealing with at the moment. I think we need to work on prevention simultaneously as we look for solutions for the current problem. So in your opinion, what might be, what kind of recommendations would you give for prevention specifically for federal government, if you can? So I'll ask this to all three of you, and you could send your responses in your perspectives. But Ms. Mercer, if you want to start and talk a little bit.
C'est probablement ce que vous allez faire.
It's probably what you're going to do because... Okay, very quickly because time is up.
Écoutez, je vous invite quand même à...
I'll invite you to follow through with the invitation of Ms. Nathan. Thank you very much. You were very enlightening, and I wish you a good evening, everyone, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.